Hi everyone, and welcome to this video about the test for NHS data analyst or information analyst. This is mostly based off of my experience, okay? And I would be showcasing or giving to you an example of a scenario that you would most likely encounter if you're going for one of these NHS data analyst or information analyst tests. Now, this is not set in stone. This is just basically to give you an idea of the sort of things you would need. Okay, and it might not be just NHS. Okay, if you're going for any tests whatsoever, you can use this to prepare. Okay, if you're going for an information analyst or data analyst role, where you'd be tested on maybe Excel, like in this situation, you would require to show your skills of manipulation and how well you can construct formulas in Excel, basically. This is going to be the first part of a two-part video. So I hope you find this useful, valuable, and you can share to people. First and foremost, before you go ahead and start anything, you always want to understand what the what's it called? You always want to understand what the data set is about. Okay, so you can see that we've got a months column here, more or less January to September, and we've got some years 2010 and 2020, some figures, and we've got some questions to answer or some things that they want us to do. So um, it's also important that you don't necessarily take this as face value. This is a pretty small data set. You might have much larger, much bigger data set, but the idea is that if you understand how this operates or you understand how you can solve this, you can easily apply that for the bigger, larger data sets. The manipulations, the techniques, the skills are all the same. So let's start. It says add a column which calculates the percentage increase or decrease for each month between the two different years. That's between 2010 and 2020. So you want to think about this before start writing any formulas in Excel. So typically when you are going to calculate the change between two values like this, especially where you have like previous or older number and a much more recent number, the formula is that we are going to take the much more recent one minus the older one or divided by the older one. So what that means is that we are going to take the value of 2020 minus 2010 or divided by 2010. So that's basically the law of mathematics, okay? And that's how you're going to calculate for a percentage increase or decrease, okay? So um, I'm going to use cell addressing to do that, so that is easy for me to fill down this column. Okay, so I'm going to start with my equals to, okay, parenthesis is in cell addressing H3 minus G3 all closed divided by G3, okay, and enter. So then I'm going to scroll down and I can see that these are set to percentage, so it comes up good. In your case, if it's not set to percentage, it might be something like this originally. You just come down here, change it to percentage, and you have it crisp. Now, if you're not told to approximate or round up, you can leave the answer the way it is. Yeah, okay, so there's no problem there. So between 2010 and 2020, there was a 53.7% decrease because it's a negative value. Between 2010 and 2020 for February, there was a 70.33% decrease. And between April 2010 and April 2020, there's been a 3,000% increase. So yeah, you can see that this is a column that has both positives and negatives. That's why it's a increase slash decrease. That is our first question done. The second question is add a column which calculates the projected monthly figures for 2030 based upon the following. So 2030, I'm going to create a new column here, call it 2030, Okay, if the figure for that month in 2010 is greater than or same as the 2020 figure, then the value for 2030 is expected to be 30% above the 2020 figure. Now, there's a lot of conditions there, okay, that you need to be very careful, okay, because this is where you can easily miss it. So you need to pay attention to details. Let's go over that again. If the figure for that month in 2010, okay, is greater than or the same as the 2020 figure, then the 2030 figure is expected to be 30% above the 2020 figure. If the figure for that month in 2020 is less than the 2010 figure, then the value for 2030 is expected to be 10% below the 2020 figure. So it's very confusing if you are unable to translate the words into formula, but it's easy if you can. So just take it step by step. This is where you need to be very careful, because one misstep here would render all your calculations wrong. So let's start. If, okay, I've got my if statement opened, brackets, logical test. So what are we testing for? The figure for that month in 2010 greater than or the same as the 2020 figure. So if this is greater than or equals to, so that's how you show greater than or equals to this. All right, so that's the logical test part of the if statement completed. So I'll put a comma, value if it is true. What do you want to happen if this condition is true? So it says that if the value for that month in 2010 is greater than or the same as the 2020 figure, then the value for 2030 is expected to be 30% above the 2020 figure. So 30%. So if it is true, then we say 30%. Now, I'm going to do some mathematics here, okay? A quick shortcut, okay? If you want to quickly get 30% of a number, so if I say 30% of 10, 30% of 10 is 3. How do you get that? 30 divided by 100 by 10 times 10, okay? That gives you 3. So that is 30%. If you want to say 30% greater than 10, okay, what is the number that is 30% greater than 10? Okay, you can easily find out how to calculate that just by doing 1.3 multiplied by 10. 1.3 multiplied by 10. Okay, so in this case, I'll be using that quick formula. All right, so it says 30% above the 2020 figure. Okay, I don't want to go calculating 30 divided by 100 multiplied by 25 plus 25, which is going to be long. So you could either do, and I'm going to show it, but this is not the most efficient way to do it. So I'm going to show it just in case it might be confusing to some people. Okay, so I'm going to do two brackets, okay, 30 divided by 100 multiplied by the value of 2020, okay, close that bracket, plus the value of 2020. So this is basically how you calculate a figure that is going to be 30% above the value for the 2020 figure for 2030. So 30 divided by 100 multiplied by the figure in 2020. Put all of that in quotation in parentheses plus the figure of 2020. Okay, so that is your value if true completed. Value if false. Now, value if false is more or less the next condition where it says if the figure for that month in 2020 is less than the 2010 figure, then the value for 2030 is expected to be 10% below the 2020 figure. Okay, 10% below the 2020 figure. So what that means is that we are going to check if this is false, because this is the opposite of the original condition. So we want it to calculate for 10% below the 2020 figure if it is false. So what that means is what? Same process. Okay, open your parenthesis, 10 divided by 100 multiplied by 2020 figure, but now this time you're gonna say minus. Okay, and because this time there's a high likelihood, okay, that your 20, in fact it's certain that your 2020 figure is going to be higher than the final value you get in this situation. So just to make things right, you want to make sure that that 2020 number comes first. So I'm going to put it at the front here and say this minus that, right? With addition, it doesn't matter where you place it, but with subtraction, it's important that you put the greater number first before you subtract the lesser number from it. Okay, just so that you don't have negative values. And I think that is all. Yep, complete. So I've closed my final parenthesis and I'm going to press enter. 32.5. So if you do a quick check for yourself, 2010 is greater than 2020 in the month of January, so that's correct. So we want our value here to be 30% greater than 2020. So to quickly check that, you could just do equals to 1.3 times 25, 32.5. Brilliant, right? So that is how I just quickly checked that indeed this number is correct. So I know that my formula is good, and then I'm just going to fill down. Now let's look at a situation where it's the other way. So where 2020 is less than 2010. So that's this situation. Right, so excuse me, there was an issue with this condition. So this condition should not have read if the figure for that month in 2020 is less than. It should have made it greater than, because if we said the figure for 2020 is less than, that's more or less saying the same thing here. Because when 2010 is greater than 2020, automatically that means 2020 is less than 2010. But this should be if the figure for that month in 2020 is greater than the 2010 figure. Okay, so 2020 being greater than 2010 figure, then the value for 2030 is expected to be 10% below the 2020 figure. So that is easily tested here. 2020 is greater than 2010, so 2030 is going to be 10% less than 2020, and you can easily see that what is 10% of 62? Can quickly calculate that. 0.1 times 62 times 62, that's 6.2. Okay, and what is 62 minus 6.2? That's 55.8. 62 minus 6.2. Good. So I'm just showing you this to easily check your answers. So as you're doing it, you want to sometimes quickly check the answers, see that you're on the right path and you're doing the right thing. Okay, so ensure the projected numbers are rounded down to a whole number. So they want you to have this rounded down to a whole number, so not into these decimal places. So you can just round down by this. That actually rounds up. So if you are going to round down, you can create a new column, okay, just to do that, or you can still put it in this original column, but I'm just going to create a new column. I'm going to say round down, okay, this, and then round down this. It's asking for the number of argument. I just put 0, okay, and drag it all the way down. Then I'm going to make this one perfect. So I'm just going to move my 2030 here. You can have this. This is your rounded down value for 2030. This is the initial 2030 value. This is the value when it is rounded down. So that is sorted. Ensure that the projected figures are rounded down to a whole number. So round down helps you to do that. Add an appropriate total row to the table. So we're just going to put it. I'm just going to say total here, okay, and for total, well, we're just going to basically add everything. So I'm going to say equals to sum, and just do this, and then close my parenthesis. So sum, then I'll select all these numbers, equals to, okay, that's sorted. Drag this here, okay, that's also sorted. Okay, then paste my formula here as well. So that's sorted. So I've added the sum, format the table, and add an appropriate title. So in formatting the table, basically it's just like you want to make this into a table, so you can either, I mean, you could format it as a table, I guess. So you could do Control T. Okay, my table has headers, and basically get this in this form, easy for you. You can then call this months rather than just having it as column. Then call this, well, this one is still the value for 2030, the raw initial calculation, and this was the total. So this was the final after doing the round down. So you can keep it in this format. You can give it a name. Obviously, they'll give you like a scenario or context of what this data is. So maybe it is data for number of attendances to A&E. Okay, so showing you how attendances to A&E has changed between 2010 and 2020. So you just come up with a suitable name for it. But basically, this is you done with the manipulations that you've been requested to do for this question. And I know that they may have made a couple of maybe lapses. If you've got any problems, let me know in the comment section below. And I'll see you in the next one where we'll cover the second part of the tests, or second part of the tests that you might see if you're applying for NHS data analyst or information analyst. Bye.